These are tough things. And by the way, they're really not tough things. They're tough things because we live in a world that makes it tough. Do you think that Shabbat would be a tough thing to keep if everybody kept it? I don't think so. I mean, if everybody was keeping it, it wouldn't be that tough. Nobody would be asking you to work on Shabbat. Nobody would schedule a funeral on Shabbat. Nobody would schedule a wedding on Shabbat. Nobody would schedule a graduation on Shabbat. Nobody would, you understand what I'm saying? No sporting events would be on Shabbat. There would be nothing to tempt you. Because I'll tell you what, there are some people that are rabid fans. I mean, just absolute over-the-top fans. And by the way, I'm a pretty big fan of certain things. You know, I have my things that I'm a fan of. But if you're over the top, what temptation would it be, especially like with college football these days, because that's on Saturday all the time, if somebody offered you tickets to your alma mater, well, you know tickets are so hard to get, to go see a big game against the arch rivals, and you got free tickets. That happened one year with us, with not us, me personally, but in our congregation. And sadly, the guy chose the tickets. And then as the guardian, when I somewhat jokingly, politely, as best I could, called him out on it, he stopped coming. He chose unwisely. He chose poorly. But Abba's going to, I promise you, put you in a place at some point where you're going to have to make a choice about to do something or to keep Shabbat. Or to do something that someone's going to claim is still keeping Shabbat when it really isn't. And you're going to have to make that choice wisely. And I pray that this teaching helps in that. All right, this is the Afterburn time. So if you have a question or comment about the entire Shabbat teaching, so I will open it up all the way to part 1 and 2, also as well as part 3. As we concluded this, you certainly can raise your hand here locally, or you can type in on the live stream.
It's been a really great teaching. Thank you. And I have a question about Hebrews chapter 4. Would you care to comment? Because in the Christian realm, they're always saying there's nothing in the New Testament that commands us to still keep the Shabbat. And yet when I was reading this in the ISR version, I think it's verse 10 when it says, there remains a rest for the people of Elohim. There's a little note, and they say there remains a Sabbath keeping for the people of Elohim, and the note says that the word is sabbatismos in Greek, which means to keep the Shabbat. So I know there's several levels of interpretation of that chapter. I wonder if you'd care to comment.
I didn't include this in the teaching. It just wasn't part of it. But yes, I'd have to go look up the Greek. I'm going to assume that ISR is giving us the correct footnote, because their footnote does say the Greek word there is sabbatismos. And if it does say sabbatismos, that would be Sabbath keeping. We have to understand the mindset is the problem. Trying to find excuses to break something or not do something or to do less, because we are inherently lazy. And especially if being lazy allows us to have more of what we want and less of what we don't want. So we don't like that which interferes with that which we want to do or don't want to do. So people do use the book of Hebrews to cover that. Of course, you got to remember that the book of Hebrews, again, is talking to Hebrews. See, this is a big, big problem for a Christian. A Christian has a hard time understanding the audience that's being talked to. And so when Yeshua is speaking to everybody he talked to pretty much exclusively, being a Jewish audience, they don't even understand that if he even hinted that they could eat whatever they wanted, like in Mark chapter 7, where they claim he said they could eat whatever they want, that his whole ministry would have ended immediately. They were flipping out because they didn't wash their hands with a tradition. And they were eating bread. What kind of flipping out do you think that they would have had if he actually said they could eat pork? Okay? I mean, they were going crazy because they were plucking grain and eating it. And that was breaking the Sabbath. You think they'd have gone crazy if he just said, hey, you don't have to keep it? Or we could do it on a different day? So now we get to the book of Hebrews, same audience. I don't know how I get there. Could it be because it's called the book of Hebrews? I think it was a stretch for me to jump to the conclusion, and I do apologize for jumping to the conclusion that is written to Hebrews. So what kind of observance do you think Hebrews probably had? Do you think they were Torah observant? Absolutely. So do you think there was any Sabbath-keeping issue there? No. And so for you to think that he would say here, no, you don't have to keep the Sabbath, they're not talking about here Shabbat from that perspective, okay? They're using this in a much more broad future. This is metaphors. These are lessons to teach a bigger picture about there being a rest for the people. Why? Because this people was about to go into exile. The temple was about to be destroyed, and they needed to know there was going to be a shalom, a peace, a rest coming. This is dealing with their problems. And I've said this over and over again. You're not going to understand one thing in the book of Hebrews unless you understand why the book is being written. Same thing with all of Paul's letters. Same thing with all of the other books in the Scripture. You know, if you don't know why Ezekiel's writing or why Isaiah's writing or why Hosea's writing, if you don't know what the whole issue is, then you're not going to have the right context to understand what they're saying. The book of Hebrews is being written to a bunch of people who are absolutely losing their minds in panic over the occupation of Jerusalem that was about to lead to the destruction of the temple and the end of society as they knew it. See, none of us lives in that world. We don't know what that world looks like. We've never been under that kind of threat. Okay? Literally with armies around Jerusalem, that siege took months and months and months. And they knew the writing was on the wall that they were losing that battle. And it was just a matter of time, and they were all going to either be dead or slaved or scattered. And so this letter is to that people, that group, in their panicky mindset. It was not about things like whether or not to keep Shabbat. It was to reassure them that there is a Shabbat, a true Shabbat coming for all of them, a rest from all of this stuff. Does that make sense? Okay? And so it's in a greater context. Now, of course, we'd like the verse to help just be there to back up Sabbath keeping. I don't think that's really what they're talking about here. I don't think it really has anything to do with Sabbath keeping. I think it has to do with teaching them as Sabbath keepers, just like you enjoy that rest on the Sabbath, that total rest that's coming, which we call the end of it all, the Olam Haba, the true endless Sabbath is still coming, even when all, you know what's about to break loose and fall on their heads. So we have to be careful that we're not using stuff for what the writer never meant it to be used for. Okay, can we do that? And so I don't think this is about actually literally the weekly Sabbath and keeping the Sabbath in that way. We're talking about using the Sabbath, the weekly Sabbath, as the metaphor for the greater shalom and peace that will be coming. So he is reminding them, yes, there is the weekly Sabbath, but that weekly Sabbath is to remind you of the Sabbath ultimately that we're waiting for. It's just a weekly reminder of the Olam Haba, the age to come. Every week we get to remember what it's like for one day, what forever is going to be like. Does that make sense? For one day, we get to remember what forever is going to be like. And I think that's what the writer in Hebrews is trying to talk about here.
I really like what you said about how we are to honor Yahweh by keeping the Sabbath and how we actually do that. I think where a lot of people get mixed up is they're kind of thinking, because our culture is not honor and shame. Like, is it wrong or is it right? Like, do I have to? You know what I mean? Would it be wrong for me to do something a certain way? And we don't really think, honoring him is you have to go the extra step. It takes extra to do that. And so I guess, an example of that, would be, my mom is not Torah observant, whatever. But so if she does something or says something, whatever, we kind of have a conflict, you know what I mean? And I'm thinking in my head, I have every right to be, upset and just be disrespectful. Am I going to do that? I mean, no, because she's my mom. I'm supposed to honor her and respect her, even though, I've got every right or something like that. When you have that, you can justify so much when you totally throw honoring out the window and you think of, whether you have to or don't have to, or if you have the right or something like that.
Amen. So let me. I just got inspired with this thought. Most people don't obey the speed limit when they drive, and there's a reason, because most people are not overly upset, except for the quick hour when it happens, when they get that $50 or $100 ticket, because that's not a whole lot to pay a price for speeding 365 days a year and getting a ticket once in a while for that price. As a matter of fact, I bet you most of you, if I said to you, if I was to charge you $100 a year and you could drive as fast as you want all the time, you'd pay it. Okay? I'm not using that to change your mindset on speeding tickets. But the point is, there's no shame that comes along with it. It's a ticket, you pay it, it's over, and that's it. Nobody even needs to know you got it. And so we're not understanding the shame in it. See, we have people in the congregation, not necessarily right here, but in the greater assembly of the body, that will go to graduations, weddings, funerals, and all these other things on Shabbat or holy days, and they don't think anything of it. As a matter of fact, they'll get in your face if you don't judge me. Nothing wrong with what I did, because they will not understand the shame in dishonoring Yahweh. And so they figure, well, it was only one time. You know, I don't have any more nieces or nephews or cousins or this or that. They're going to graduate or get married, so I did the one time, and that's it. Oh, well, if it only comes up once every couple of years, who cares? What's the big deal? Come on. It's all the heart and the mindset that allows you to do those things. He's all worried about you spending forever with him with a mindset of, it's only one time. Who cares? What's the big deal? Come on. That mindset makes him concerned about spending forever with you. I assure you that. Okay? That's the mindset I don't think he wants to spend forever with, because what else would you say? It's only one time, no big deal. Come on. What's so wrong with it? What's so big deal? Come on. Especially weddings. Weddings are like the easiest thing where people want to say, oh, but it's a wedding, and we're gonna have Yahweh in the ceremony because we're gonna do it, in the blessings and everything. We're gonna focus on him for like 3 seconds during the wedding. and it's something he instructs us to do, to get married and have weddings. He instructs us to work too, but he tells us to only do that on 6 days a week. So we are instructed to work. We're just not instructed to do it on one day. So let's be really careful with all that. Thank you, Kara, for bringing it out. Because I think the reason people are still so callous and casual with their Shabbat breaking and keeping is because they don't see any shame in what they're doing when they break it. And they don't see it as honoring him. You know when you want to really honor him is when it's hardest to do. That's when it really honors him. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're honoring the wishes of whoever you're giving into. You, your boss, your family member, whoever it is. Who are you giving that honor to? All honor, we say this in our blessings, right? You are worthy and deserving of all honor, all. So why are we giving honor to another? Now, we honor our parents because he tells us to, which basically not honors him, because he tells us to honor our parents. And so that's, in essence, honoring him.
It's kind of a story related to it. At work, where, I've been having prayer requests for this stuff going on at work. It was kind of a relief that another guy came up to me and he said, one, they have the joke, my team leads now have the joke of when they go talk to higher ups, they introduce me as, this is our Jewish friend. So if you're thinking about asking him to come in Friday night or Saturday, just don't worry about it. He's not going to be there. But so that's a blessing, because less that I have to tell him, I can't make it. But also he's come up and he said, I've seen you and you really have no worry about losing your job when it comes up to these feast stuff like, why? I'm like, well, I'll get a better job if I lose this one for that. He's like, oh, okay, well, where do you go to church? Because I might need to look into this, because I'm worried about losing my job, but I don't care what kind of religion stuff I got to go to. I need my job. It's just a blessing of, I've had people at work go, hey, I need to look into what you're looking into, because I ain't got that kind of confidence in mine. Well,
there you go. Well, that's a great testimony. Excellent. I want to add two things to that. One is, I want to tell a story similar to that. We used to have a gentleman that came to the congregation, left a long time ago. But while he was attending, he had a situation where his company was one of those 7-day-a-week, and you had shifts, and he was working whatever shift he was working. And his team was now, the whole shifts got changed, but his team was now going to have to work Friday night and Saturday, or Friday night into Saturday. And he just went very calmly up to his boss and said, listen, you've known this all along. This is my position, and I just want to let you know that I don't have a problem with it if you need to fire me or anything, but I'm not coming in when you make the shift change. Okay, so I don't want you to be left in a lurch because you're like shocked that I'm not here. So I'm just letting you know, you need to do what you need to do, but I need to do what I need to do. And you know what they did? They ended up changing just for his shift. They made an exception because they didn't want him to be lost as an employee and because he clearly had no fear. In other words, if there's fear, they can push the button and leverage you. If there's no fear, they know now it's on them. He just put the shoe on the other foot. Now you got to decide if you want to lose me. I don't need to decide if I want the job. I already told you I don't care. I'm not worried about the job. So now you got to decide whether or not it's worth losing me over. Now, of course, if you're not a great employee, that's an easy choice. So you ought to be the best employee you can. That was point number one. Point number two is Zarek will absolutely destroy every bit of his argument if he compromises ever. Then the bosses will see that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Make that as a lesson to you as well. With your family members, you go to that one wedding, or you go to that one graduation, or that one funeral, that one whatever, and you now have completely undermined your integrity with everything with those people. Because you've already shown them, especially if you've told them no other times, and now you finally gave in because they really pushed hard enough on you. Now they just know, just like a kid does with a parent, if I push hard enough, I'll get my way. Children do that, usually with one of the two parents. They know if I keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing, I'll get there. You can't be the one that they know if they push hard enough, they're going to get their way. You've got to be the immovable object. Where you just look them in the eye and say, do what you got to do, but I'm not doing it. I don't want to mess up things here. I like the job. I like the, tell them, look, I'd like to stay, but if you got to let me go, that's okay. I'll get something else. My guy can handle all that. Give God. How about giving Yahweh the glory and honor by just saying, like Zarek, to say, look, you can do what you want. You can't stop him from giving me something else. I'm not worried about it. Point the finger in the right direction and say, you are actually one of those weapons formed against me that can't prosper. Okay, do what you got to do. I'm not worried about it. As a matter of fact, I'm excited. I wonder what he's going to give me to do next. How about that thought? How about saying to the boss when he goes to fire you, say, hey, that's okay. I'm excited. You want to leave? No, I don't want to leave, but I don't know what he's going to do, and I think it's going to be cool to see what he does. I trust him. I'm not worried. Problem is you worry. And you fear. But you don't understand. My mother is 80 years old and she'll never talk to me again. That may happen. But that's when you look Mom in the eye and say, Mom, you taught me to believe in God. I do believe. And my relationship with him, I'm trying to walk out in fear and trembling, says, I can't do this. Now, if you don't like that, it's your fault. You taught me about him. I've never said that before. You might want to try that one. Why are you getting mad at me? You taught me this. What do you mean I taught you this? You taught me to believe in a creator being. You introduced me to him. Now you're mad at me because I'm listening to him. It's not my fault. You raised me up to believe in him. I believe. Anybody ever try that? Try that next time. Why are you mad at me? It's your fault. What do you mean it's my fault? I wouldn't have known of him if you didn't introduce him to me. You taught me about him. No, you didn't teach. I never taught you all that Jewish stuff. Doesn't matter. You taught me about him. I figured the rest of it out in my relationship with him. He showed me the rest. You introduced me to him. Most of you have family members that at least that much you can say. No matter how awful they may be, no matter how bad they are in their behavior, they probably tried to get you to believe in God, to believe in a creator being. And if that's the case, use that to your best advantage and say, okay, you taught me. I didn't teach you all this. We were doing Sunday and Christmas. Well, you taught me about him. The rest of it is all what man decided to do with it. I'm trying to do what he said to do with it.
This is actually Dawid's testimony, but
Well, he's behind you if he wants to say it.
do you want to give it? Okay. All right.
I don't know if you realized he was standing right behind you, but he was.
He came back out.
All right.
he works for Duracell through a temp agency, through Manpower. And when he went to work for Duracell through Manpower, they did not work on Shabbat. Because of the hurricanes and issues where more batteries are needed in more places, they started working mandatory Shabbats. But when he went to work for Manpower, he made it clear that he was not going to work on Shabbat. And he made sure that the letter that you wrote, you write for us, was on file with Manpower. When they talked about it before one of the first mandatory Shabbats, they pointed him out and they said, he prepared ahead of time. He didn't come to us and complain now, but he laid the groundwork ahead of time. And that was all it needed.
Well, yeah, because otherwise, this is the problem, because if he just went to them at the last minute, they're thinking, oh, well, you just don't want to work Saturdays because you've got other things you'd rather do. He came up in the front and said, we don't even work Saturdays right now, but I just want to let you know if that ever comes up, I can't do it. That's a very different mindset. Look, I can tell you how my mother called me on this when I was a teenager. Remember, I was raised in a Jewish home that kept very little. And so it was during the holy days, and it was probably during unleavened bread or something like that. You know, I decided, well, it's a holy day, so I'm staying home because it's a holy day. And my mother said, no problem. You're going to shul all day, though. In other words, you're going to synagogue. I said, no. I went to school because I wasn't taught to keep these things. I just thought it was a great loophole to stay home. As a young teenager. See, that's what the job was thinking, too. Are you going to try and all of a sudden become religious to try to get away from, be a Sabbath keeper just because you don't want to work, just because now all of a sudden we're working Saturday? Or were you always a Sabbath keeper, and can you document that? See, David, I went and put that letter in advance, so it was already on record. And that's a good way to go. It's a good way to go. But my mother was smart. She said, hey, no problem. I don't have a problem with that. You don't want to go to school? It's a holy day? Good. You're going to services, though. And see, and I wasn't in that mindset at the time. I just didn't want to go to school. Because this is at like 14, 15 years old, and I still Abba hadn't woke me up to all of that, in my somewhat casual, cultural Jewish home that I was raised in. Now, of course, for the high holy days, we did go. But I had gotten to the point where I had stopped going right after I got bar mitzvah. So now my mother was like, oh, so you want to go now? You can go. You can stay home from school and go. But I expect you to be there. Put on your suit and go. See, don't be a hypocrite. That's really the point. Don't be a hypocrite. Okay, and the other thing is be filled with integrity. Once you draw the lines, you cannot cross those lines. It's a great parenting thought also. With your children, once you cross a line, it's hard to reestablish that hard line because they already know that you broke it last time. All right, Dawid, do you want to add to the story? All right, go ahead.
The backstory is the difference between MTOI, Messianic Torah Observant Israel, and the general Messianic movement. When I was back in Florida a while ago, I was working as a gas station clerk, and I was attending a synagogue at the time. And I wasn't perfect by any means, but I was doing my best to keep Shabbat, and I was doing my best to keep the feasts. I knew enough to know that I needed to stay away from that kind of thing. And the boss I had, up front, everything from the beginning was great. And he, for like 6 months, gave me every Sabbath, every feast day, up until Shmini Atzeret, up until the 8th day of the Feast of Sukkot, in which basically he finally said, I can't honor this last one. I was like, what? What are you talking about? This is the last one until next spring.
Right.
So I only had 24-hour notice about this. So I basically went, okay, what am I going to do? So I went to my rabbi at the time, which I don't call him rabbi now. And
this is a Messianic Jewish
right.
Rabbi, okay.
And he basically said, well, you can do that, or you can do what you're going to do anyway, which is let him fire you if he has to, or you can go ahead and work for him and say that this is because of a testimony about what Yeshua has done for you. And I was like, no, that doesn't work. But the difference, what I'm trying to point out is the difference is I asked months before I got the job I have, well, not a month, about a month before I got the job I have now, I asked Rabbi Steve for one of those letters of accommodation that I knew was there. And that's the difference. This rabbi and this leadership will stick up for you and will stand with you when you're trying to keep Torah.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. And by the way, if you do need those letters, actually Robert is the one that produces them at this point and makes sure that they're compliant with what your particular company needs in their letter. Some need more, some need less information. And so just contact admin@mtoi.org and Robert can help you with that. Okay, we produced sort of a form letter that we generally use, but depending on what your HR department needs, we can give them either more or less information in addition to what we put it as a standard letter. And so if you are looking to do this, one of the things you want to do is find out what does your HR department need, because every company is a little bit different. And so our general form letter may be totally enough, or it may need a little more, or maybe too much information. They may just need a little bit less information to get the same point across. Because we give backup verses and other things to show where these things come from, etc. Okay, we do that for people with their jobs as well as for children in school, when you need to get letters to get them out of school as well. All right. And the key message here from both Dawid and from Zarek is let them know in advance. When you let them know in advance, this is tremendously helpful. Okay? Before you even get the job, yes, it's also probably a good idea. I know a lot of people are afraid if I tell them in advance, they won't give me the job. Well, that might be true, it might not be true, but the thing is, how are they going to feel when you throw this on them later and feel like you tricked them or something? Or they hired you under false pretenses, because if they had known, they wouldn't have hired you. I'd rather just get it out of the way and let them know. By the way, just so you know, I've gotten some jobs that started within 3 to 5 weeks of Sukkot, and I've told them right up front, by the way, just so you know I didn't earn any vacation yet, you haven't even hired me yet, but if you hire me, I already have plane tickets and whatever it was, because back then, I would go and actually fly to some place where I was keeping Sukkot. I said, so I will not be here for that week. Whatever it was, week, 8, 10 days, whatever it came out to, a week and a half. So they would know up front. I said, you don't have to pay me for it, whatever you need to do, but just so you know, I want to work here, that's all great, but this is already booked, this is already a done deal. All right, and then I also laid out the rest of the feast, etc. for them. Let them know up front. It's better not to give them any surprises. Okay? But I also laid up front when I'm doing this from a salesman's point of view, and all of you are salesmen, you just don't know it, because you have to sell yourself on a job interview. Okay, so every one of you has to be in sales at least for a few seconds. By the way, if you're married, you had to sell a lot. Both of you. Okay? One on, I hope he wants to marry me, and the other one on, I hope she'll marry me, and there's a sales thing going on. So if you're at the job interview, when you bring this stuff up, bring it up by saying, look, I just want you to know that I take every aspect of what the scripture says equally seriously, which means that you will absolutely get an honest day's work out of me for an honest day's pay. You will absolutely know that I will never steal from you, not only items, but also time. You won't see me sitting there, like this on work hours, playing with my phone and playing on Facebook, whatever people do, all right? Okay, but you better be that person. Show them what it looks like to be that employee that is trustworthy, that well done, good and trustworthy servant. Demonstrate it with the human beings first. And if you say that as part of the interview, then you say, look, so I just wanted to let you know that the same integrity that I have, where I will not come in on a Shabbat and I will not work on a holy day, I also will never steal from you. I will never dishonor your company. I will never talk badly about you. All equally. Make that part of why he should hire you or she should hire you. The person should hire you because of all of that is part of what you get. Not just, I got a guy who just wants time off. No, you get a guy who takes the relationship and honoring of authority in a very high way. and you are my employer, I'm going to make sure that I'm not doing anything to dishonor you. You're not going to come by and hear me talking to the other guys joking about you, tearing down the boss, tearing down the company. Okay, you shouldn't be the one making that conversation. Does that make sense?
David Botwick Rice has some sunset issues and sunrise issues, I guess. If actual sunset time is 7:45 on Friday night, but darkness begins 30 minutes later, at what time should we begin Shabbat? And then another one about the Havdalah and ending Shabbat about 40 minutes after sundown.
Okay. All right, first of all, it's Havdalah. Okay, Havdalah, which is the Jewish traditional way of closing or ending Shabbat. All right, so let me go back to the articles I was reading to try to see what the Jewish community said about, like, if you live someplace where the sun never really sets, or if it sets, it's only for a few minutes, but it doesn't actually get dark. Okay, that is the only time when they utilize actual going below the horizon. They're looking for 3 stars, really, is the sort of the tradition. Okay, being able to, it's got to be dark. But what they do is they start in advance with lighting candles and stuff before Shabbat, because they don't want to do that on Shabbat. And so look, they traditionally run about a 25-hour Shabbat. That way they're protecting both ends. I do the same thing. You can ask my children. I start early and I finish late. I want to make sure that before I do the end of Shabbat, that I am absolutely able to go out there and it is pretty dark. I know that way it's definitely over. All right? So if we're going to be conservative, we want to err on the side of being conservative. That means that we want to make sure that we have protected it. So nothing wrong with it being a little bit longer. It's a problem if you accidentally make it shorter, and the shorter puts you in trouble. Okay, so as far as the time, if it says sundown time on your phone when you do the actual scientific, the declaration of sundown, although they have different, there's nautical sundown and astronomical sundown, there's like millions of different choices there. I would go with start earlier, whatever the early one is that's on your phone. That's usually the one that they give you that's pretty early and it's still pretty light outside. That's when it actually goes below the horizon, but it's still light. But it's actually crested down below the horizon. Or it's gone below the, crested would mean, I guess, coming back up, but it's gone below the horizon. And so I would start then, but I would not finish until it's dark. That way you kind of make sure you really get it in there properly, all right? And my family will tell you that we've done the breaking of the fast on Yom Kippur at my parents' house, because my parents will do that part at least. And, they've gone to put the food out and everything's ready, and they'll start when it's theoretically sundown according to whatever clock they want to go by. And my family will look to me knowing not until Daddy says he's gone outside and looked and it's dark. Even though everybody's hungry, we wait. We wait. Now, of course, if people are going to stay for the Nila service afterwards, and as a Jewish synagogue, they're going to wait for after sundown to have that service. Those people are going to get home even later than that before they finally break the fast. So that would be my answer. Be conservative, okay? Be a maximalist. Start early and late, not the other way around. Okay, so in my house, we start early and we end late. All right? So people here have even asked sometimes, because they've been like, somebody wanted to buy something or do something that we could do business-wise after services, maybe if I bring some Bibles or whatever, and I'll go and look outside. I'm not just going to go by, well, the phone says it's sundown is 7:45. I'll go outside. If 7:45 looks real light, we're not stopping. Okay, the same thing with breaking the fast. I know you're going to be hungry, but we're not going to eat until it's dark enough outside where I feel like it's sundown. Okay? And if it bothers you or not, I get to make that call. All right, that's sort of my job, my responsibility as the gatekeeper, right? As to try to be the one at the gate and judge. So we'll be going a few minutes longer just to make sure it's dark. Okay? Of course, if you don't like that idea, you don't have to eat with us. You can go home, and I won't know what you do, and that's your problem. But if it's here, we're going to just wait and make sure it's dark. Okay? Is that fair? Make sense?
Samuel Egan has, please, so what can we actually do on Shabbat? Can you give us a couple examples?
Okay, so Shabbat has in it the idea of a few things. It's the idea of refreshing. So you refresh by resting, so that Shabbat will be a good day to sleep in, take a nap, that kind of thing, to rest, to literally physically rest. Obviously, there's the instruction, if possible, to meet together, which you're doing virtually here online, is to meet together. So that's going to take up, obviously, at this point, almost 4 hours of time. Okay, so that takes over a good chunk of our Shabbat time. But it's a really good time to be with family, but in the context of focusing on Him. In other words, to be together with family, meeting with friends and family, with our whole focus on appreciating that it's all about Him. We do that after services with our own egg. We're going to break bread together. We're going to eat. We're going to enjoy each other's company in the context of Him. Because quite frankly, most of us probably would never have met each other if that wasn't the case. The only reason we know each other, I think it's almost mind-blowing that some of you have literally uprooted your lives, moved here from other places, and that would never have happened except that we're connected by Him. Because I would never have met you guys in California and here, okay, or Arizona, or how would I have met you? Okay, or you guys were up in Pennsylvania at the time? We would never have met. But He connected us. Even people live right in this town, we would never, we maybe passed each other in a store and never said hello. Why would we? What would have connected us? So on Shabbat, in my house, I'll give you an idea, my house, Friday nights, once we know that it's Shabbat, we have our family meal together. Often the children will do some of the Parsha Pearl stuff. So my wife will give them like the word search and some of the memory verse things and stuff to do from the Parsha Pearl program that they get to do. But also the children and the family has movies that we know are good biblical movies, as good as they can be. We know there's all kinds of silliness in them. But you know what? Sometimes that's a good exercise to see who can pick out the most things wrong with the movie. And so we have a fairly large library. So usually about 9 or 10 o'clock, we'd run a little late night on a Friday night. The family would put on something that is, biblically and scripturally appropriate for focusing on Him on a Friday night. We were watching a story about King David last night. I don't usually catch most of that because I'm usually putting finishing touches on the sermon. But the family's always, when I go up the staircase from my basement office, around that time of night, they're always watching something, as we have lots of Bible movies, Jeremiah and Exodus movies and Moses. And, you guys are familiar. You know what I'm talking about. And so we have all that. And then on Sabbath, obviously, we have services in the afternoon. So I sleep in. I wake up 10:30. Okay? And that's only because they wake me up. But I wake up pretty much 10:30 on Shabbat. Okay, so that's a good time to get some physical rest, to get some sleep. And we have a casual breakfast, then we come here. And so then after this, again, spending time together. Some people use this as a time to maybe Skype with other people in the body that you know from the live stream. And maybe you could schedule time after services to Skype with them and get to spend some time getting to know them and fellowship time, because these are people that are part of the body. There's lots of things along those lines that you can do. But it's trying to maintain focus on Him. We'll even occasionally we'll play Bible games. Games that test your Bible knowledge, and they're things that are absolutely still focused on Him. They're not just games for games. Okay? There are things where you have to know your stuff, and it's going to see what you know. So we can even work some of those in occasionally on the Sabbath. All right? But it has to be not a game that just sort of has some biblical names in it, like, I don't know what games it would be, but it has to actually be something that has to do with you talking about understanding, learning, and testing your knowledge of Scripture. That makes sense to me anyway. So hopefully that answered the question somewhat. You could always call with specific things that you want to know if it's okay to do, or email, and we could always respond to that.
Okay, I think Ken Zimmerman. This question is from Terry, but at the end this is Ken. He says in Genesis 49:10, the verse ends with "until Shiloh comes." Mm-hmm. I've understood this to mean until Messiah comes. If that's true, and Messiah has come, does the scepter still remain with Judah?
Okay, so has Messiah come with the scepter yet? Is He coming with the scepter soon? Okay, that's the Shiloh we're looking for. Okay? See, the scepter, when it's being wielded by, in other words, when He's the judge, when He's going to judge many peoples and many nations and all that other stuff that we know He's going to do, that's when the scepter goes back to Yeshua. That's the Shiloh we're talking about. And the Jewish community understood that too. When they understood the verse, they've always understood that to mean when Messiah comes in fullness and is actually ruling and reigning? Okay. Good question, though, because that's something the Christians would say, well, he came. That's true. But is he now interacting with us to answer all the chukim questions, the chukim questions? No, he's not. Okay? We're still left with human beings to do that. However, when he shows up and he's ruling and reigning from Jerusalem, now he can answer everybody's questions. Now he's got the scepter. And Judah will be very happy, by the way, to hand him over the scepter. Okay? They don't want it. Here, you have it. That's great. All right? I mean, listen, I have it somewhat when people ask me questions. It's no fun. I don't want the scepter either. I'd rather him show up and answer everybody's questions.
Just to kind of add on to what you were saying, part of the testimony, which I've had people say that they tried the same thing when they started doing the mandatory Fridays and Saturdays, and they told them they were out of luck. I always point out, when you got hired, you let them know this is what you do, because that's the key there. They hire me knowing I have to have these days off because of this and these days off because of this. Mm-hmm. After that point, they go ahead and hire you. They already know, and you just let them know what days it comes on.
And by the way, that, once it's in your file and they've hired you already having that, that's a hard argument for them to win in court. If you wanted to, take them, if you wanted to sue them for firing you over holy days and Sabbaths, if you said, wait a minute, but I gave you this in advance, you hired me knowing it. Okay, think about the power that gives you to say, I told you before you hired me. You can't change that now. I took this job because we agreed. Okay? Because hiring, sometimes the boss forgets it's a two-way street. You agreed to hire me, but I agreed to work for you. And under that agreement, you agreed to pay me such and such. You agreed to let me have, a lunch break if not, or whatever. Whatever the agreement was. And if you agreed to have Sabbaths and holy days off, well, that was the agreement. Now, if you want to renegotiate, we have to renegotiate, but you can't just all of a sudden change the agreement unilaterally.